San Francisco 49ers 34, Detroit Lions 31. Niners off to the Super Bowl. Didn't look like that for a while, though. It was 24-7, Sam.
Yeah. The start of the game was the Lions executed the script. You know, the one that we've been talking about for weeks. They got the ball. They didn't take the ball. They were given the ball. The 49ers deferred for the second half, so they didn't care about that whole dynamic. They gave the Lions the opportunity to have the ball first. They scored. They went down. They scored a touchdown. They did it pretty impressively. They then got a stop, and then they got another touchdown. They got up 14-0. They put the 49ers in that hole, and at least for the first half, it did kind of look like it was working. The 49ers didn't really look themselves. You know, they were struggling. The Lions were having no problems whatsoever. At least for the first half, it looked like this might work. They were going to force the Niners to play from a hole for basically the entirety of the game. And then the second half, the Lions stopped scoring, and that became a problem.
I want to go back and forth between the individual plays that made this thing happen, but like the high-level narrative type of stuff as well, because I think the Shouty shows they're not on right now. They'll be on in the morning.
Yeah.
And they're going to be critical of Dan Campbell and his fourth down decisions.
Yeah, well, to be fair, that's one that won't just be the Shouty shows. A lot of people, I think, are going to criticize Dan Campbell for being too aggressive, for going for it on fourth down multiple times in the second half and not trying to kick points.
So the first big one, third quarter, they're up 24-10, and they're in field goal range. And they have a 3rd and 4 where they run the ball. And again, I just want to continue to compliment Greg Olsen. When he calls these games, he just does a really good job of not only painting the picture of what's happening, but knowing his research and knowing what he's looking for going in. Multiple times during this, he said they changed their third down decision-making, Detroit, in order to go for it on 4th and short. And so, again, 3rd and 4, they run it to make it 4th and 2. They're going to go for it. They're up 14. They go for it. Jared Goff steps up in the pocket, throws the ball a little bit down and away to Josh Reynolds, who drops the pass. And that was the biggest turning point in the game. A 4th and 2 drop by Josh Reynolds. He had a drop later that came back to bite as well.
Yeah.
But that was the one I think people would say is the most egregious one, because they were in field goal range and they had a chance to go up 17.
Sure. But look, this is, there's that, famous line, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. This is Dan Campbell. One of the reasons they've been so successful this season is because of going for these fourth down decisions. And, Kevin Clark had a tweet that if you're going to praise him for going for it when it works, you have to live with these types of decisions. Like going away from it when it matters is how you become Brandon Staley, right? And you never really bought into the concept in the first place. But I think they have done well by going for it on those fourth downs. And it's not like they didn't do it at all in this game, right? Before halftime, they could have been aggressive and they could have tried to get a touchdown just before the half, and they settled for the field goal on 4th and 3 from the 3, like 4th and goal from the 3-yard line. They could have gone for it again. They could have gone all or nothing. Let's get another touchdown. Let's really drop the hammer on them. And instead, they settled for that field goal. So it's not like they never did it. And to be honest, you can look at this and say, okay, the way the game went, 3 points would have been huge, obviously, given the end score. Also, given the way the second half was going, you're like, we really need to get a score, like get a touchdown going, because this thing is getting away from us.
So we always have this momentum debate, right? Like clearly this changed the course of the game for the Niners. I also want to say, here's the deal. The fourth down models and all that, it's a win probability model, and it usually says, here's how you would increase your win probability. When those decisions fail, you usually decrease your win probability more than you would have if you kicked the field goal. I know this is like a Captain Obvious type of thing here. So everything which
is baked into the headline figure of go no go, like that chance is in there. It's not like that changes everything.
I forget what the percentages were, but if before it said if you make this, you're at 80%, and if you kick the field goal, you'll be at 78%. But if you don't get it, you'll be at 76% or whatever. That's how it usually goes, right? And if you don't get it. So clearly, when the fourth downs fail, they do have a bigger effect on your team. They do give the other team a better chance to win. And that is what happened with Detroit. They had 2 fourth down failures. This particular one when it was 24-10, and another one when they were down 3 when they were down 3 at their own 30, at the 30s. They could have kicked a 47-yard field goal. But again, I don't think that, just to like tie it up, the Niners still came back and scored another touchdown. So the Lions are trying to maximize points.
Yeah, they are. And they needed to. This was a game, I think, where they did need, okay, you could look at the final score and say, it was a 3-point game, therefore the field goal was important. The field goal was the difference. But this was a game, at one point, the 49ers had, 27 unanswered points? They had scored on their first 5 possessions of the second half. Like, this game was really running away from Detroit. And this is how they've been ahead all the way through the season. Like, I have no problem, I don't think, with Dan Campbell going for the 4th downs. I think, look, one of them they should have had, right? They got it into the hands of the receiver. Okay, it was a little bit off target. It was under pressure. But he got it there. Receivers got to catch that. They had another drive on 3rd and 10, a first down catch. Reynolds drops it again. Like, you're going to need those plays if you're going to win a game like that. So, could you have used the 3-point? Sure, but you also could have used guy catching the ball that's put in his hands to keep a drive going.
If you go back to the preview show, we talked about how the Lions probably need to stay aggressive because, personally, I don't trust their defense. And as great as their defense played really well early on, they did a nice job, slowing down this Niners rushing attack, slowing down Brock Purdy and all those playmakers. But the reality is that defense should not have that much success against the Niners. And that ended up becoming the case over time. So the Lions stayed aggressive, and they said, yeah, even if we're up 2 scores, we're going to stay aggressive because we need to maximize points.
Right. Remember, they were a 7.5-point underdog going into this game. So even though they went up to a big lead, they scored 14-0, and then it was, 21-7. When they got up to a big lead, they still treated this like they were the underdogs. They didn't shift everything and say, no, we've got to get... the opposite of that is what people criticize Shanahan for, right? Is we get too conservative, we tighten up, and then... you have to pick one. You can't look at this and say simply by results this was the wrong process. You either accept the process or you don't. If you applaud this as a process and say being aggressive, being trying to maximize those scores, trying to get touchdowns instead of field goals, if that's the right way of doing it, sometimes it's not going to work and you're going to lose because of it.
And I thought that the way the Lions played. And look, when you dial up trick plays, it doesn't mean that they're all going to work. Some of them work for just 5 yards. Some of them actually create big plays. But the Lions had that strategy as well, right? Their first touchdown is a 42-yard end around to Jameson Williams. What an incredible effort by Jameson Williams. Some of the plays, and he ended up having the touchdown to get them within 3. Later, he had another incredible catch where he dropped it and then ended up still coming away with it. Jameson Williams with some huge plays in this game. But my point is, the Lions had flea flickers and end arounds. They had those plays dialed up because they knew, hey, we need to maximize points.
They played the game like they were a 7.5-point underdog, and they simply didn't change that strategy when they were up big and the score was diminishing as the second half went on. And okay, you can criticize them for that, and people have already, and they will continue for the next day or two, particularly on the shouty shows. But I don't really have a problem with it. I think that's how you win a game like this. And okay, they didn't get it done, but was Dan Campbell not kicking a field goal the reason they lost? Or was it, Jahmyr Gibbs fumbling the ball away? Or was it the defense failing to stop them for basically the entirety of the second half? Was it Jared Goff unearthing some sort of weird, just total missed throw and they had a fake or a trick play dialed up and he just underthrew the thing by a mile, just didn't come out of his hand right? Each one of these plays you can start to look at and say it's a 3-point game. Any one of those probably changes it back to Detroit's favor. And one of the ways that they lost the game was Dan Campbell being aggressive and not getting the result.
Yeah, so let's bounce around here. When it was 24-10, you got the drop by Josh Reynolds. It did seem like, the Niners offense came to life. How did that happen? Brock Purdy with an overthrow, Kindle Vildor goes off of his helmet, and Brandon Ayuk catches the ball off Vildor's helmet.
Yeah.
For a 58-yarder.
A deep shot. It's kind of, there's contact there. Vildor has position. It's going over Ayuk's head. It ends up, as he said, he sort of pushes off a little bit, dives to try and catch it, is late doing that. It smacks him right in the face and just bounces right up into Ayuk's hands, who makes a spectacular catch out of it. And and ends up getting like probably the biggest play of the game from a 49ers offense point of view. They ruled him down by contact, and they end up punching it in a few plays later. But that was a huge swing in the game.
I mean, so that was when, it was 24-10. And I remember you and I showed up at the office at about halftime, right, and sat there and started talking. I was like, I was not expecting a blowout. I was not expecting the Lions to dominate this game the way that they had.
Yeah, let's give them credit for the first half for a second. Like, that was such an impressive half of football. They were winning every collision. They were making all the big plays. They had gotten all the momentum, for whatever you think of that term, early in the game. There was one play where there was a Sam Laporta pass over the middle. Laporta connects with Greenlaw. I mean, Greenlaw comes in and hits him and comes off worse. Like, Laporta basically ran him over. Greenlaw gets a stinger, leaves the game. Then there was, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson clocks Deebo Samuel after the Brock Purdy interception. Those two have been going back and forth earlier in the season. But I forget what they had exactly in the first half, but they were over 140-something yards, rushing yards by the Lions, which is the most a Kyle Shanahan team has ever given up in a half of football. Like, they absolutely dominated that first half. With the drive just before halftime, the Lions ran on 3rd and 12, picked it up. They also converted a 3rd and 18. Goff just missed a touchdown before that half. They end up settling for a field goal, but it still felt like everything in the first half was Detroit.
The 3rd and 18, like Amon-Ra St. Brown just looked like he was uncoverable.
Yeah, everything had gone their way.
And then when he was covered and he needed 3 more yards to pick up the first down, he would just run through the Niners defense to get 3, to get what he needed. Jahmyr Gibbs has his 15-yard touchdown run. There was a point, yes, where the Lions were it had the 42-yarder there for Jameson Williams, but averaging over 10 yards a carry on their first 10 or 12 carries.
The Gibbs, he had a really nice touchdown run, the one to put them up 21-7. He had 2 guys that he made miss. One of them was Fred Warner, I think. There was a third guy that it wasn't even a missed tackle. He just put on a quick burst of acceleration between the 2 missed tackles that he forced to get in. Like, incredible touchdown by him. They were so good in the first half.
I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. It's unlike me to interrupt you like that. I'm sorry. Gibbs' speed was legit a couple times. Like, there were plays where you're watching on our normal broadcast angle, you're like, he's done. This is a 2-yard play, and he turned it into 10. Or that particular touchdown turned it into 15. I was ready to draft the next speedy running back in the top 10. I was ready to go. Right. I mean, but like Gibbs, everything was cooking for the Lions.
And it is worth remembering, like, the stuff that Greg Olsen was bringing up, the fact that they are willing to run the ball on 3rd and 12 against light, 5-man boxes because everyone's expecting pass, because they know if they get to 4th and 3, they're happy to go for it. Like, you can't disconnect that from, it's a 3-point game at the end, so we should have taken a field goal. Like, this is part of the same strategy. Their 3rd down offense is different to most teams in the NFL because they are willing to go for it on those 4th down plays, and they get a lot of them, right? You can't then ignore that and roll it back and say, yeah, but this time they should have changed.
So, yeah, I mean, my takeaway from the Lions first half and into the second half, Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, is it being reported that he's very close to being the Washington Commanders' new head coach?
Yes, it has been reported in several places that it's basically done, but they haven't announced it yet. On the broadcast, they were basically saying he's gone.
Okay, so I mean, first off, I really feel for Lions fans generally in a game like this where you're going to look back to some drops and decisions and the what ifs and just the fandom aspect of it. I really feel for Lions fans.
They remain the only franchise that has played every year of the Super Bowl era and has not made a Super Bowl. That's the way they contrived the stat. CBS, I think, dropped that. I think it was before the Fox game. But CBS, yeah. So I was like, they said that. And I was like, hang on, that doesn't make sense. The Browns have been around that long. And then, they had those when they became the Ravens,
The Browns disappeared for a few years.
Yeah.
But the point I wanted to make was just an unbelievable job of seeing the personnel that the Lions have added over the last few years. Amon-Ra, Laporta, their offensive line, Gibbs and Montgomery in the backfield, and the way they use them, right? When you talk about a team's identity, and I've used the exotic smash mouth, I've used that phrase a few times when you're watching that run game, it's just an unbelievable mix of good play calling that plays to the strengths of their team. And so I'm just that was going to be my big takeaway. I'm like, man, the Lions, when I was going to say the Lions are going to the Super Bowl. What an incredible mix of the talent that they've added in the play calling and what they've been able to execute.
Yeah, look, big picture, this has still been a hugely successful season for the Detroit Lions. They made the NFC Championship game. That was not expected. They were supposed to be a playoff team, and maybe they could win a game. Or to get to where they got to was impressive. To get as close as they got to knocking off the 49ers as a 7.5-point underdog was impressive as well. And it's good for the future because so many of their important players have been either rookies or second-year players, young guys, right? Jahmyr Gibbs, as we talked about, had a huge touchdown for them. Jamison Williams, who kudos to them for not completely losing faith in him. Remember, we were saying when they brought in Donovan Peoples-Jones and, Khalif Raymond had been there. You're like, it's impossible not to see that as some kind of indictment in Jamison Williams, who had drops earlier in the season and, hadn't been a big part of the offense and had a suspension, all this kind of stuff. They stuck with him, and he's made a lot of big plays in the last few weeks. His speed, his ability clearly still translates. Jared Goff has had an amazing season. I think a career year for him. Oh, there's so many young players that have made big impacts to this defense or to this team. Aiden Hutchinson, obviously on defense. There's a lot to be encouraged about from a Detroit Lions point of view. And then ultimately, they lost the game for a variety of different reasons. Individual plays, Dan Campbell choosing to go for it on the fourth down. But maybe the biggest one is, the defense, after playing really well in the first half, ceased to play really well for the second half, and ultimately the 49ers still put up over 400 yards of offense, and they couldn't stop them when they needed to the most.
Yeah, I want to get this from the Niners' point of view, and the Jahmyr Gibbs fumble was huge, obviously.
Massive.
So it was 24-10. Niners score, Lions come back, they're still up 7. Jahmyr Gibbs fumbles in their in Lions territory, and the Niners again come right back and score. Christian McCaffrey touchdown 2 out of 3, believe it was.
And he screwed up the Gibbs thing. He screwed up twice in the same play. Like he went the wrong side on a trap run and then fumbled the ball after the run was kind of botched and it was a mess because Goff had to sort of get in his way to give him the handoff, and the whole timing was messed up. But it wasn't one of those ones where you see sometimes where the running back's in the wrong place, the handoff gets messed up because of that, and he never really has it. You know what I mean? And it's a fumble like from the beginning. He had it. He had the ball. He was carrying it normally in his right hand and then fumbled it away. Terrible play from him. On the one hand, he gets the amazing touchdown earlier in the game, but that screw up and fumble was obviously a huge turning point in the game as well.
Their defense, man. Their defense is, the name talent on the defensive line, maybe the best linebacker core in the NFL, right up there with the Ravens, you'd say, right, with Fred Warner and Drake Greenlaw. And they've had these bouts, particularly over the last couple of weeks, where they just couldn't stop anything, couldn't stop the run. Big plays in the passing game, and that was what was happening. The 3rd and 18 pass conversion that you mentioned, being run all over by the Lions. But the Niners defense did crack down much better in the second half. And then offensively, Brock Purdy making plays outside of structure. The number of times that he had to he had a great scramble in the fourth quarter to put them into position for their the final touchdown, and just scrambling to throw as well. Purdy with some incredible plays down the stretch.
He did it again. Maybe he is Joe Montana. Maybe every Brock Purdy clutch game is going to be after throwing a couple of bad plays early in the game and digging them out of a hole. Maybe he actually is the next Joe Montana.
There's something to that. There is something to the ability to play your best when it's on the line, and or in a game when you weren't great early on. The ability to bounce back from that and not let things snowball. Now again, there's luck involved. There's 50. He ends up with 8.6 yards per attempt. The 51-yarder to Brandon Ayuk, again, completely lucky, right? That was the biggest play of the game, right? They didn't have anything else over 28. So there's luck involved there too. But the man was creating outside of structure quite a bit in this game.
Yeah, no, he made a bunch of big plays. It's another thing. It's like last week, right? Like last week, was he Joe Montana, or did Joe Barry's defense get weak again at the critical time, which it's done all the way through the season? And it's like, well, it's probably a bit of both. And this was, again, we'll get to this with the Chiefs game, but the Chiefs had kind of rediscovered their offense facing a team that didn't have any edge rushers and then a team that didn't have any linebackers, right? Is that real, or does it stay there when they run up against one of the best defenses in the NFL in Baltimore? We're doing the same thing with Brock Purdy. Like, it happened again, but the Lions have also had a bad defense for most of the season. So it's probably a bit of both. And maybe you're going to need, that kind of luck or just the opposition to be right for those kinds of things. But ultimately, for the purposes of like this game, and they're in a Super Bowl now, it doesn't matter. Brock Purdy played well when it mattered the most. Whether or not he was afforded that opportunity because the Lions aren't very good on defense is kind of irrelevant. The point is, the quarterback came good when they needed him, and he did bail them out with some big plays late in the game. In addition to getting, the luck of the ball pinging off a DB's face right into the hands of his receiver.
And at the end of the day, it's the same old Niners where you have those, just like we're talking about St. Brown's plays where he's running through Niners defenders. You have Deebo Samuel pretty much looking like Deebo Samuel with his shoulder injury. 4 of his 8 catches go for first downs. He was huge after the catch again. Ayuk found the end zone on his 1 plus the 51-yarder. Kyle Juszczyk was on the receiving end of 2 of those scramble drill plays by Brock Purdy. George Kittle with a couple catches, and then Christian McCaffrey running the ball, and what the Niners were able to do with McCaffrey out of the backfield and running the ball. That they have to rely on all those playmakers. So that's the thing, right? The Shanahan narrative. You were waiting for this, right? You were waiting for them to be down 10. So talk about that. That's my interview question. So talk about being down 10.
The last 2 weeks, I think, have been important psychologically for the 49ers because they have not, previous to this, done this before. They haven't dug themselves out of a big hole that they've been in before. And we sort of speculated that's the only way of really beating this team is to get ahead of them early, force them out of their usual front-running game plan, and make them play a different game. And Baltimore was able to do that to them early in the season, absolutely stomped on them. They were never able to execute any kind of comeback. The last week where they finally got their 1-30 now in coming back from 5 points, entering the fourth quarter, whatever.
They were tied going into the fourth, I think. It doesn't change your stats.
Last week, though.
They got the one, sorry.
And then this week, where they're just down in a huge hole from the first half, those were 2 big comebacks against, good playoff teams, albeit flawed ones. And that's important for them psychologically. Again, whether it was because of the defense, it doesn't really matter. For their purposes, they got wins in situations that they haven't previously got wins against. And if in the Super Bowl, if Kansas City, if Patrick Mahomes looks unstoppable and they're in a 10-point hole, they probably believe more now than they would have 2 weeks ago when they'd never done it before.
I mean, yeah. I mean, what I tried to the thing I tried to argue against a couple of weeks ago, and this kept being brought up, was like the very specific stat of the Shanahan teams being down 8 going into the fourth quarter. We still haven't had a win like that, though. Right? So that stat still holds. And my point back then was, if you're going to use this stat, which is real, right, and project that forward and say, well, the Kyle Shanahan offense just can't come back. They don't know how to make comebacks, right? It's just a very specific situation. They've made 3-point comebacks. They've made other comebacks. They've maybe not entered the fourth quarter with a deficit, but had fourth quarter deficits and still made comebacks. So that was like my point back then, was like, let's not overrate this one particular stat. But I think your point is fair that, hey, they were down 3 scores. They were down 2 touchdowns in the second half. And hey, they needed a fumble recovery. They needed to have a Jahmyr Gibbs fumble, and they needed some of that.
Right? Like at some point in any game like this where you're down big, you're probably going to need a play to break in your direction for you to get back in that. Particularly a game where, both teams are going to score more than 30. You're going to need a way of getting the possession back that isn't, just getting a stop.
But I think the important part is when the game flow changes a little bit, right? They had to be a pass-first offense last week in the come-from-behind opportunity against the Packers. In this game, there was points where they probably had to get away from the run game until they got into the red zone with McCaffrey. McCaffrey only had 2 touchdowns, by the way, not 3. Mitchell had 1, Elijah Mitchell. Not Earl. So, yeah, I mean, that's the story here, I think, is, hey, they showed that they're not just front runners, that they don't just need to, run their game plan oriented offense, that they can, come from behind. You get some of those plays that break your way, but they showed that they could do that. I think that was huge. And I think Purdy is a big part of that. I do think the demeanor that he brings to the table does help in that whole situation for the Niners.
And again, for a young quarterback, getting those 2 wins under his belt, like Brock Purdy isn't sitting there going, for the last 2 weeks, I mean, yeah, like I'm thankful it was the Packers and the Lions defense. Otherwise, there's no way I'd have made that comeback. Like in Brock Purdy's head, he's just like, yeah, they weren't great games, but we got the win at the end. Like I can do this, you know? He's getting confidence from those two games. And I think confidence is a powerful and important thing for this team going up against Kansas City, who we will, discuss later, are seemingly inevitable in the playoffs in the postseason.
Yeah, you're going to have to probably play a little cleaner in that game. So in the end, I mean, the Niners end up with 34 points, and there was the short field in there for one of them, but they really started moving the ball in the second half. And so the Lions defense and their inability, look, at the end of the day, the Lions defense felt like, oh, it's going to be tough. If they make it to the Super Bowl against Kansas City, it's going to be tough, right? To be able to put a full game together. There's some holes on that defense, and I just think that was a big part of the whole second half collapse. Yeah, there was drops, the fourth down decisions and all that, but the defense not being able to make any stops whatsoever. Also a huge part of this, because the Niners end up with 34 points after really scuffling in the first half. And they got, Purdy had that interception as well. That was how the Lions got up 3 scores. What are you laughing at over there?
I hadn't put it together until now. Remember there was a story ages ago, I think reasonably early into Dan Campbell's, no, it was like last year or something, where he was on Pardon My Take, and it became clear that he had tried to get a real-life lion reinstalled as their mascot, and everyone was like, Dan Campbell's crazy. And then in this game, they showed that in 1983, the Lions had a real-life lion mascot on the sideline for the last time they'd played the 49ers in the playoffs or whatever that game was. So he was like harking back to something that used to be done. Dan Campbell just wanted to go old school and bring the lion back. Crazy as that is.
I didn't know that the Lions played in 83.
I mean, I didn't know they had a real-life lion on the sideline.
I knew they played that season because they've played in every year of the
Correct.
Super Bowl era.
Yeah.
But that they lost in the playoffs to the 49ers there.
I do think it's kind of funny that, in this day and age of like warning labels and everything, don't eat batteries, don't, hair dry yourself in the bath and whatever. In 1983, everyone was cool with, in a 70,000-seater stadium or whatever, with screaming people, just have a real-life lion with like a flimsy chain around its neck. That can't go wrong. There's no problem there. Cool with that.
Just because I like to scour Twitter while I'm on here.
Of course.
Ben Baldwin has a tweet out there about the biggest plays in this game by win probability added.
Okay.
And it's interesting when you look at it, because some of them are first down plays. Some of them are first quarter plays. Some of them are the fourth down plays that we're talking about, right? So you've got the Jahmyr Gibbs fumble is the biggest one.
Yep.
The second biggest one is Jared Goff throwing incomplete on 4th and 3 to Amon-Ra St. Brown. That was the second failed fourth down. Not a drop, but just fell incomplete by a mile. The third biggest play was Jamison Williams end around for 42 yards, because it's a 42-yard touchdown when you're not expected to score it. Mm-hmm. You got Brock Purdy to Brandon Ayuk for the 51-yarder off the helmet. Of course, that's a huge one. And then Jake Moody's missed field goal early in the game, which is another interesting one, right? Because the night, what was that, 4th and what? Do you remember the missed field goal? But I mean, that was like, hey, just kick a field goal. It's probably 4th and 3, 4th and 4, and then ended up being a pretty big miss, a 48-yard field goal.
But also, by the way, let's remember that as a thing, like this whole just take the points. What if the guy missed the field goal?
Yeah, I mean, it's baked into the decision.
Right.
I just want to highlight that, like, yes, when you fail, it is worse than had you kicked the field goal, right? You are inherently making I don't want to use the word riskier decision, but the win probability swings are wider, I would say, with those fourth down decisions. But the upside is higher, right? And that's where the bottom line is.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else about this game? Congrats to the Niners and 49ers fans. Lions fans, man, it is tough. It's tough to just – I know that there's a lot of fans online. We get stuck in just like you either win or you don't, and so there's 31 failures out there every single year. There's some other fans that I follow or interact with who I appreciate. They kind of like enjoy the journey, and not a lot of fans can relate to that. Right, like there are some Bills fans out there who are like, oh, I mean, we had a lot of fun this year, even though it didn't end up where we wanted. And I hope that Lions fans can at least look at this year and be like, man, this was fun. We're seeing our team. I don't know if you're going to be back. I don't know. It's a challenge to get through all these hurdles, to get your home game, to get to the NFC Championship, to even get a lead in the NFC Championship. But hope you're enjoying the ride and the entertainment value that the Lions have brought this year, because it's been unbelievable to watch them build this squad and be this good this quickly within 3 years of going from number 2 overall pick to top 4 team in the NFL and just a couple plays away from playing in the Super Bowl.
I was just looking up the distances of those fourth down attempts rather than the just take the field goal attempt. 43 and 45 yards, I think they would have been.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably going to be hit.
But you should make them, but
they're
those
90%
are not
hit rate.
But they're not gimmies.
Yeah,
like it's not just let's just chalk up the 3 points and move on. Like
it would have felt way worse if they missed it than if you missed the fourth down attempt, right? Because you don't have the same payout.
Right.
The other interesting thing about models, though, too, that I don't know how baked in it is. I think a lot of the models say, here's the win probability, like if you convert, right? If you get 3 on 4th and 3. And a lot of times the payout was like Lamar Jackson earlier today. They go for it on 4th and 1 and he picks up 40 or whatever it was. Sometimes the payout's even greater than you anticipated. I think it's somewhat baked in, but sometimes you get even more than you banked for, And so just not this time.
It's the problem. Like my only problem with it as a concept is that's the thing everyone's going to focus on, right? The shouty shows, anyone with an axe to grind over analytics. That's what tomorrow is going to be about. It's going to be Dan Campbell didn't kick points, even though the points, it's not like they were guaranteed. He didn't kick a 43 and a 45-yard field goal attempt to try and stay what would have turned out to be the 3 points he needed to stay tied in the game. But as you just discussed, like the biggest win probability plays in the game were not necessarily those ones. They were other plays. They were the turnover. They were, plays like that. Like it's not, I don't think it's what should get 100% of your focus. They were one of a number of different ways that this game got away from Detroit. Like anytime you look at the lead they had and the way the game ends up being, one play didn't do it, right? A lot of things turned what was like a beatdown, as you were saying. The Lions were destroying the 49ers in the first half. A lot of things had to swing against them for it to go from a destruction in their favor to a game they ultimately lost. It wasn't just Dan Campbell decided not to kick a 43-yard attempt.
So congrats to the Niners. I mean, I think they needed a full team effort. The defense stepped it up in the second half when they needed to. I still think they've got some holes that they need to figure out going into this game against the Chiefs. And then offensively, I mean, again, Purdy's going to have to play a cleaner game start to finish, I believe. I mean, look, if it's a close game and he pulls one out in the fourth quarter, again, fine.
Or just be Joe Montana.
But they probably have to play a cleaner game because the Chiefs are just playing really clean football right now. And they're going to need last one of those playmakers, Debo, Ayuk, McCaffrey, Kittle, Juszczyk, whoever it is. They're going to have to use all of them.
The last genuinely good game that Purdy played was like Week 17 against the Commanders.
Yeah.
And then just before that, he had the Ravens game, which wasn't as bad as it looked, but was certainly probably his worst game of the season. Purdy hasn't had a good run for a while.